For those who may have missed us, the recording's on now. Okay. I want to keep this informal. I don't know if you've seen the slides that I posted as a reply to the event. They're just top of mind ideas that we can address. Didn't know if anyone had a particular spot where they would like to start. So let me open that to the floor before I bring up any of my slides for discussion starters. Okay. Anything in particular?
Not from my side, because I mean, they're all interrelated.
Okay. Let me go ahead and again, this is a top of mind. And again, I'm not trying to give everything. Let me go back. I figure I'm going to leave it in edit mode because that way I can go ahead and modify it and jump around a little bit easier than doing it. These are some top of mind spots where I thought we might want to start. First is basically the decision-making process itself, the choices, the options that are selected, the decision process itself. We actually narrow the options down. One topic that Reg and I have kicked around before is the types of decisions, how to categorize different types of decisions, and whether or not we need a different decision-making process, and if so, how so. The issue of decision rights comes up frequently, the boundaries for those decisions, particularly in very bureaucratic organizations that are trying to get leaner. The question of who is involved and how best to involve them. Many of the alternate structures gets into different collaboration techniques of bringing people together. Then the last two are kind of really similar, and that is looking at the quality of the decision relative to the speed. And can you have both, and if so, how so? Any particular preference on where anyone would like to start?
I mean, for me, the types of decisions can, to some degree, dictate the decision-making processes and also the decision rights, I guess.
Okay. If you want to jump into the types of decisions, then
that's just my suggestion. I don't know about the others.
It's probably the one that I've had less experience with, and this is kind of where, when I was putting this together yesterday, I just threw some top of mind ideas together relative to if you were to categorize different decisions and then determine the different approaches to those, what type of factors might be thought about for that.
Yeah, I guess I struggled when this first came out because decision making is, you know, everything from a $5 decision to $50 million decision. It's everything from building collaboration to, you know, et cetera. So I'm really kind of struggling with what your end results are that you're looking for and how we work toward that. So
I don't know if I have any end results other than there's a lot of discussion about the need for quicker decision making, but no context ever given to how we get there. So what I'd like to see is, you know, what kind of context do we need to address decision making in general, and then more specific recommendations to address the larger issue about agility.
okay.
Okay, but again,
for me, there are two natural divides. One is management decision making, and the other is technical decision making, and there's probably some in between.
One of the things that I find at the core of decision making is the impact on communication. How will communication and the methods subject to the decisions? So that can come from, for example, if you take a steering group, what's the recommended number of people involved? Are they the right people at the right place in the right time to actually make whatever type of decision is necessary?
Just to help me on that, what comes first for you, the forum or the decision that needs to be made at the end?
The forum.
So you start with the forum and then you decide on the decisions for them.
Well, there's an overarching, first of all, it has been identified decisions need to be made. So whether it's digital transformation and whether that actually comes with, you know, the process that's involved in that. And then it's actually looking at the forum, who is needed, who will be the right decision makers to help make the decisions along that journey. And then I see it as the communication that wraps around that. And that is hugely important, because if communication isn't right and effective, going back to Russ's point, then effective decision making won't be done in a timely manner or with the approach that's needed.
I mean, that was helpful, because my first understanding was you have a forum and then you decide the decisions they will make. And I always struggle with that, to say, well, first of all, what are the decisions, the types of decisions we need to make? And then what type of communication, or sorry, what type of process for the decision making do we need? Is it a group, an individual, or whatever it is? And so often in organizations, they start with the group first and then bring the decisions in, which for me is back to front. So that's why I wanted the clarity. Thanks.
Yeah, and also I think it depends on the scope of the decision making as well, whether is it an enterprise level or is it within exactly what Reg mentioned, within a department or within a function.
Yeah.
And what's the financial implication for the decision making as well, of what investment is needed, and whether is it sitting within the business side, or is it in a technological enabling enhancement, like Hazel was mentioning about digital transformation, where you need to have multiple roadmaps to be aligned towards a common purpose for the decision making, which might take few years. And how do you actually cascade it in agility space on a consecutive short-term spin of you invest on a short-term of the roadmap, where you are trying to align multiple roadmaps to actually add value to a business. And the challenge is like who is actually taking the responsibility for the end-to-end visibility when there are multiple stakeholders who need to take the decision one by one.
And I agree with you, Manoj, and that's where, and I'm talking about certainly an initiative that I'm working on at the moment, and secondly, it is in healthcare. So financial is not a factor that decisions are needed right now at the moment, maybe down the line for doing an impact analysis. But for now, it's actually, I always ensure that there is a senior responsible officer to champion it and understand that the governance that's set out from the outset will actually help dictate, you know, from a reporting point of view. But maybe that's going a little bit off piece.
And also that visibility needs to be across the board as well. So whoever is sponsoring the initiative needs to be visible throughout the process to influence others to actually take or support the decision going forward.
Totally.
Well, I see this also as, I'm going to use the term forum. Maybe that's your category that you're talking about, but you know, you've got day-to-day decisions and you've got departmental decisions and there's all these different forums where decisions are being made, much like what you're saying, Manoj, where each one of those has got its own forum of people that need to be involved. Who are the stakeholders in each one of those categories, blah, 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 blah. And, you know, so you organize your meetings or your decision-making process around that forum that's happening. I mean, you've got a hospital scenario, you have a completely different forum than doing day-to-day operational issues, you know, and they're all going to come out somewhat differently depending on what that form is. You know, does it have to be decided today? I mean, is the building on fire, or is this something you got to get done in 6 months? So it's just so many varieties that fit into this whole process, and also trying to decide how does this fit into our overall approach to decision making as a company or as an organization. It's just very complex.
And also the culture, the adaptation of culture to actually embed that within the system, to actually embrace that agility, which is a mindset shift by itself. And is the organization adaptable enough to actually bring that together for people to actually make that shift?
Yeah, and if you've got a high trust organization versus a low trust organization, you've got a totally different set of issues to deal with. I mean, you've got to probably do more collaborate. You know, in the low trust, you've got to do more collaboration, more communication, blah, 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 blah. We're in a high trust organization or function, whatever. You don't have to do as much of that because they're going to trust you already. So you don't have to build like some of the things you're talking about. There's building blocks you don't have to do for some of those decisions because you're already way down the road. So
it seems to me we're at risk at the minute of getting into the detail when the first stage is what the types of decisions are. And this is natural, it's not a criticism. It's
see, I think in that respect, to keep it simple, it's best to have 3 levels within an organization. One, the senior most strategic decision making, where the organization is going forward, and then a middle team who is actually needing to actually deliver that within the organization, and another team which is all other people who need to actually do it on day-to-day once the decision is made and things need to be implemented. And it's like scaling that between the 3 levels of where, and is it sort of connected with any regulatory policies which the business needs to actually adhere to within a time frame. So in health sector, as Hazel mentioned, if it's a necessity that something has to be adapted to the current ways of working, and if there's a time frame, then you have to start acting quickly. But then what's the stake, what's the risk involved if you don't do it?
Yeah, I mean,
by looking at the 3 levels, though, you're looking at one classification of very high level, high impact decisions, and you're ignoring all the other decisions that need to be taken as it's being implemented. So I guess this gets back to the classification issue again of how do you classify different decisions so that they're made at the appropriate level with the appropriate people involved?
I mean, for me, this is really, really important because we have an emerging workforce that view organizational life differently to previous generations. That is clear in everything that is researched, published, and experienced in organizations. And this is why, for me, if the types of decisions are labeled according to hierarchical functions and current way of doing things, then you're not going to attract those people. That, for me, is quite clear in most types of organizations. And this is why the types of decisions it's important to understand so that they can be made in the most appropriate place by the most appropriate people, which I argue is not the case today.
I completely agree with you, Ray. So now I'm wondering, is the question going back to the types of decisions? So when, I'm just throwing this in there, that when a program is initiated, that is why that there is a steering committee set up, or in some instances, under the umbrella forum can be a task force as well. I happen to be on both at the moment for completely different reasons. For me to say to answer the types of decisions, it's so variable, I wouldn't be able to actually compartmentalize them.
Well, maybe we can simplify things to begin with, which is something I always try to do, is to unwrap all this complexity, simplify it, and then revisit it. And I would start very basically and says, is it a management decision that needs to be made? Is it a technology decision? And of course, you then can segment what technology means, so that we can then see if there needs to be a difference. And if there does, what is that difference in terms of behavior and the information communication? Do they have the right information, the right environment to make those decisions? Because in the classic hierarchical organization, the assumption starts off that the higher up, the better you know the situation to make a decision, because you have information that you haven't allowed others to have. And so we sort of start off from that mindset and then decide who can make a decision or not. Whereas if we start the other way, from what needs to be done, we then find that the answer is very different when you come to who should do it.
Yeah. If I was going to look at it, I would look at it in almost like a cascading approach, where you start with that top senior, even if it's hierarchical or not, and it's, you know, what's happening there cascades down to different people, different groups, different technical, you know, human resource, whatever. But at each of those levels, it kind of cascades down to a different forum, a different group of people. I mean, that's my coming out of business and manufacturing and hierarchical systems. That's how things got done. Mm-hmm. And today it's going more flat, but it's still hierarchical. It just may be 4 levels versus 25 levels, but it still kind of has to go somehow down that process. That's my thought. Maybe I'm old school.
I'm not sure whether it's about old or new school.
Yeah.
The delayering process wasn't, in my experience and reading, done to make better decisions. It was actually initially a cost exercise, which then gives us inherent problems like working from home today, and the issues around managing that is now trying to be compressed into a hierarchical organization, and I wonder why it doesn't work. And it's the same old story. So if we come back to decisions and say, let's forget the shape of the organization and identify the types of decisions that need to be made, so that we can see if they can be made elsewhere. And the very top is about the statement of purpose. That's why we're in business. And there are some objectives attached to that. So what are the decisions that need to be made in order to achieve that statement of purpose and those objectives? And it doesn't necessarily mean that they need to be cascaded. And for example, the RASI system is classically decided on hierarchy in terms of responsibilities, accountabilities, all these sorts of things. But when you actually challenge that and look at it from where the decisions really need to be made and the activities undertaken, it destroys that traditional model of RASI. And so it's a matter of just looking at it differently from basic principles, I suggest.
I think it's more looking at, again, there are a lot of writing and stuff between flight levels and agenda shift and different people. And it's more looking at sort of the new ways of working and bringing in agility, lean, and you talk all different methodologies, but trying to have a lean OKR implemented within an organization where the objectives are aligned with some sort of a key results within different departments or capabilities to actually deliver, and then continuously targeting those different short-term deliverables which actually outcome for the whole capabilities of the organization to be delivering on an iterative basis. So it's bringing that into an organization culture is what needs to happen, and that's actually bringing people all together and co-creating a lot of, either through community of practice or firms where you are actually getting more people to actually open up to see how within their team or function they could help overall to actually achieve it. And if you are able to actually get more people to actually get involved and engage, it gives more grounding for that to be delivered. And that's how it needs to evolve going forward. So, and it definitely, as Hazel mentioned, you need to have new processes to deliver that with different rules, which needs to govern from the business as well as from the technical front, but it needs to be not separated. Every individual or the department or the functions who needs to take this decision need to actually come together to actually look for what's the outcome each one is trying to achieve overall for the organization and how it can be aligned. And sometimes you have to give and take, but different departments needs to actually bring that mind shift change rather than saying, when it's a technical debt, I'm responsible for it. And if it's a business debt, the business is responsible for it. It's everyone's responsibility now to actually shift going forward. And how do you actually bring that into an organization? And same thing, multiple organizations, depending upon the level and the complexity in their work, it takes different time slots, and you need more champions or catalysts cross-functionally to actually enhance that to deliver.
Manoj, I'm smiling because that's exactly the situation I'm presented with now. So yet again, I'm going to throw the H word in here, the spanner in the works, and it's not Hazel, it's healthcare. So going back up to the point there of knowledge required, it's actually the knowledge, the clinical knowledge that's required, not just technical, not just management. The impact is on the patient for sure, but this is a huge, this is very, and I'll quote you, Reg, this is very important to me to know that that element is part of the knowledge that's required. So that's where we have a multidisciplinary team coming together to from the various local enterprises to actually, well, basically they've stolen my analogy for them to think about the WIFM, what's in it for me as part of that group coming together to make the decisions.
I think the drive needs to be more building that knowledge sharing through either community of practice or academies within the function where you have some sort of influence, and actually having multiple owners who are actually passionate to actually build that on a regular basis. And it needs to be aligned to a purpose.
I actually quite like Mintzberg's approach. Community of practice is very, very good and very effective. It actually, though, reinforces and or builds silos, because the common interest is the thing that brings the community of practice together. If we can consider it as a community, which most people have failed to create in organizations, they can happen in the outside society, but we're not successful in most organizations in building a community, then I think your ideas about transfer of knowledge and information will improve significantly. And we're now moving really fast into this world of robonomics, and the C-suite don't even understand what automation and that stuff really means in most cases, and yet they're still commanding and controlling the decisions. And so for me, it keeps coming back to what are the types of decisions, where do they need to be made, and how do we make sure they have the information necessary to do that? And we have to look at it as a community or a system, and not by function, which most of it is at the moment.
Eduardo had a couple of comments in the chat window. One was relative to decisions are made where the information is. I question whether it's where the information is or the expertise is, because information is portable.
Can I answer that? Well, definitely the information when I'm talking about the factual information. And the factual information is coming either not only from experience, because the experience is what happened in the past, but the decision is made today. And today you need some information from your experience and knowledge, but also some factual information that is going to allow you to make the right decision. But also you need, what is the process to process that information, not only the experience. What is the thinking process you have to reach that conclusion? Because at the end, you need to make the right questions to get the right information to reach the right conclusion about the right decision. That's what I'm referring to. It's where the information means the factual information, either about the facts or about the people who really knows about the situation. And sometimes some decisions are made from someone else, not from the guy who is dealing with the implications of the decision. That's what I mean by, where is the information?
I mean, I really support that. And what we have now increasingly is the challenge of identifying what is the reality of the information, because more and more functions protect their entities by telling half-truths at best. And so we're trying to best guess the other half of the truth. So for me, I find it's getting more difficult now to find the reality. And with hybrid organizations, it's making it even more difficult because you're relying on technology, and so the personal relationship and body language and stuff, which was always a clue in the past at a meeting, or it's just vanished now. So this reality of what is true information is getting more and more difficult.
I think there's also the issue of, is the information all knowable? Or what do you discover along the way that you might not have known is needed?
Well, yeah.
Can you repeat that, Ross? I'm sorry, I didn't get you.
The other question is, is everything knowable? If you're focusing on a perfect world, you know what you need to know when you know it. But oftentimes, not only what Reg was saying is there's conflicting opinions of what reality is, which is a sense-making issue, but there's also some things are in fact not knowable. There have to be judgments, which brings into what criteria is in your judgment. And that opens up a whole bunch of other issues of how you come to those type of worldviews. There's also the issue of the decision itself of what you may know at that time that you don't know. And then during implementation, you discover things you might have overlooked, which gets into another part of the decision-making process is, how do you recognize you made a mistake quick enough so you can recover and move back?
Well, that's okay. The thing is, that's why it's important to make the right question the right way. Because at the end, the question you ask is going to condition the information you get as an answer. You either get an opinion or it's a fact. Because at the end, is how you make decisions based on factual information.
Yes, but if
it's interesting because before this meeting, I wrote down Johari window. What I know, what you know, what we both know, and what none of us know. Yep. And it is what it is, right? Yep. My experience from a managerial perspective is you start putting these forums together and you start moving forward, and the problems are going to arise. You're going to see them. Things are going to bite you in the back, things you couldn't think about, people you didn't involve, and then you manipulate your group so that if this is a process that's going forward, you learn from the experience and you add to that group as you go forward, whatever you need. You also take away from that group. You also get rid of stuff you don't need. I mean, it's just it's an ever-changing process, and you refine it based on, if, for instance, if you've got a daily operational type process, you refine that process so that you are handling your daily issues. If it's a monthly, whatever, sales forecast something or whatever, you manipulate that group to give you the best answer. So I'm looking at these as forums that are ongoing and continuing, or that happen on a periodic basis. Does that make sense?
Yeah. For me, there will always be unproven assumptions. We have to live with that. We can't prove all assumptions,
Sure.
which then we have to look at how we deal with risk. Do we do it in a causation approach, which we're trying to get rid of all the risks or pass it on to someone else? Or do we do it on the effectuation approach and say, well, what can we afford to lose? Let's move forward and open it up and see what happens. And this is a I don't like the word cultural, but this is the behavior, the organization's behavioral approach. And there is no such thing as right that's right and wrong that's wrong. It's always a mix of the two. And this is why, for me, it keeps coming back to finding where the most appropriate place for that decision to be made is, also includes the environment is the appropriate environment for that decision, which includes information, knowledge, communication, and all those sorts of things. And I think from my own experience, both as a manager, researcher, and consultant, that the hierarchical organization tends to be stronger than the ability to identify those important locations.
And that's an interesting point that you say, Reg, because can I assume we are talking about mature organizations here? So we do executive advisory to startups because innovation is just part of the world now. And we all know that entrepreneurs and their innovations are very small organizations. And one of the things that we pride ourselves on selling that's unique from anybody else is we help you identify what you don't know. What you think you know, we help you validate that. And what you're doing and do well, we look at how can we do it better. And when you actually, from a decision-making point of view, there is only a very niche number of people who may not have the knowledge on board. So you're talking about CEO, founder, perhaps we'll throw in a CFO who may have other quivers in their bows, their quiver, whatever, armory, thank you. And it's about then, and you may just have like a technical person, but in terms of that's where then it's my experience is being able to help them, Eduardo, to your point. It's how you pose the question, whether it's actually going to be a point of view or a fact, but it's just another consideration for the conversation that it's not always mature organizations that we're looking at that can have hierarchical. I mean, we talk about agile as well, even in the mature organizations, you know, the stand-ups in the morning, the 15 minutes on Zoom, that actually help make the decisions to move faster as well. So a few things just to unpick from there, from what I'm hearing, which hopefully is helpful.
Can I ask you to elaborate a bit? What do you mean by mature organization?
So I guess those that have a solid foundation in their leadership and business, you know, that now are, I suppose, really are independent and aren't necessarily looking for funding as well. So they're established with credibility. They're, you know, they've got inverted commas sales pipeline, whatever. It's a good question though, that mature, but I suppose really when you look at startups, which can be anything from acorn to unicorn, and then they're 5 to 7 years further down the line and established and successful.
For me, inherent in that discussion, which is really, really nice, I like it, because inherent within that is an assumption, I believe, and that is a mature organization, however you define that, should or does act differently to an entrepreneur starting up a new business. And I think that's one of our problems, is you get to a certain size of organization and you start putting in control mechanisms, things based on industrial age thinking. And the very successful organizations increasingly are the ones who don't do that. They remain more effectuation and only use causation when it's absolutely necessary. And this combination gets lost somewhere. And when you see large organizations and these conglomerates being broken up, it's because they can no longer sustain that mindset in today's society. And even when you break up these giants into typically 2 or 3 industries, even they don't survive and get broken up further. And you start to have to become more entrepreneurial in your mindset. The oil and gas industry is a classic example, as is the auto industry right now. They're all becoming entrepreneurs again, and operating in a very, very different way. So I always struggle with this combination of entrepreneur being the startup and the mature being the steady state hierarchical organization.
I agree with you, Reg, because if you look at organizations as they grow, you end up with more departments, more divisions, more et cetera, because you can't manage it all from one spot, right? You got to delegate down. Each division's got its own things going, and what might be making one division successful may not make another division successful at all. So there's different entrepreneurial things going on over here. You acquire somebody, there's another entrepreneurial thing. So yeah, entrepreneurialism lives in mature organizations as well, in my opinion, unless they're going to fade away and die, because if you don't change, you don't survive.
And the risk is they don't capitalize on that entrepreneurship.
Yeah.
That's for me the risk. And companies like Hire and other organizations that either have micro enterprises or network approaches retain that entrepreneurship. And this is why they're successful.
Okay, Reg,
one of the reasons.
Okay, Reg, your original framework had knowledge requirement and the decision-making environment available. Is there a third category in your framework?
So I'm just thinking, because I never thought of it as a framework. It's just the way my brain works. For me, I look at it as a system, and then at each part of the system, I say to the people involved, where are we? Is this a management decision process? Is this a technical one? And what type of technical decision is it? Does it need a management input? And if we look at the health service, when we did a lot of work on the police and the nursing, the KPI systems were creating fraud. They would move patients from one room to another, and that was an input and an output on the sheets. And so they were very efficient, but they've never left the hospital. And there are lots of other examples I can give you, but it's not fraud in the major sense, but it is at the capital purses of the government. And so it's looking at that environment and saying, right, where's this decision should it be made? And so it's not a framework that I use as such.
I'm smiling, Reg, because I may steal that phrase as I wrote in the chat: framework versus brain work.
Yeah. I'm not a framework person. I work a lot with engineers, particularly in the auto business, and they are wedded to their processes and things, and they're like chronometers, for every eventuality in the world, when all they need is a swatch. I mean, it just drives me mad.
Okay. Let me jump to. Okay. Let's jump a little bit then. We've been kind of talking about who's involved in the environment. We haven't really talked at all about the process of identifying options or selecting among those options. What I've got here is some typical ways for selection. But when I started thinking about the ways of identifying options, it almost got too big as a different techniques, different approaches. Then on the selection process, I kind of did a first cut at how some actual decisions are made.
Ross, can I make a comment about that slide?
Yeah, go ahead.
for me, it's technocentric, as opposed to person-centric. Let me try and explain what I mean by that. At a psychological level, you can, and this isn't about jumping on the table or being an extrovert and stuff, is how we make sense of things. An introvert will gather lots and lots of information and process it in their head and come up with some conclusion. Whereas the extrovert tends to ask questions of people to help them make sense in a very overt way by listening to how they react and interact. Both have significant impacts on how an organization accepts and acknowledges those people if they don't understand that process. And that process we all do. And it's always missing for me when we look at these technical approaches to decision making, because it doesn't include that brain work process. If you've got a group-based consensus, is there such a thing? I'm not sure. Sorry, I couldn't hear.
Yeah, I was asking, Reg, what does he mean by technical process?
What do I mean by?
Technical? Is that what you said?
Yes, because
You
you just
broke
said
up,
that.
sorry.
Okay,
When
can-
I
About
say
technical
when I say
process to make
technical,
decisions.
yeah. When I say technical processes, these three here: manager, leader, group-based, co-creative, process-oriented. They are all about the process of making a decision in
Okay.
organizational terms. What's
Okay.
missing for me is how we as people make our decisions. Sometimes the processes constrain our ability to operate. Other times the processes enable us to operate. And I think this
I'm sorry.
distinction is different.
I'm sorry, it's cutting, but what do you mean by process?
What, for the individual or the organization?
Yes, because you say
The
sometimes the
individual,
process.
okay. If I'm trying to make a decision, I have to, in my head, in some way, weigh up the different options and come up with a decision. Okay. Now, there are many ways I can do that. I can write something out and do an equation based on a cost-benefit analysis, all these sorts of things. When I'm doing it, though, in my head, without writing things down or so forth, I will gather information,
Okay.
whatever means, and in my head, come to some conclusion.
You follow a process in your head and come to a conclusion.
I'm not sure it's a process, it's just a
way of thinking.
biological reaction of how my brain works. It's not a process in the common sense of the word.
It's a way of how you process the information, am I right? To come to conclusion.
But it's not always the same in all circumstances.
No, I'm trying to understand when you say somehow your brain works, somehow meaning there is a way your brain is working to process the information to come to a conclusion.
But I can't tell you how it does it. So for example, if I said to you, what was your grandmother's maiden name? You would probably come up with that instantly. And yet you won't know how you got that information into your conscious being. All I'm saying is some people, in order to make sense of the information and come to a decision within their head, need to ask questions of people so that the assumptions they are wrestling with in their head, they speak them out and get responses. And they bring all those responses together in order to make a decision. Other people ask for information, whether that's asking a question, which is not giving a proposal, it's asking a question, reading something, listening to something, they're gathering information, and silently in their head, they then come up with a decision. Those two different practices require different work environments. Most organizations do not cater for one or the other. They tend to go for whatever the process is for the leader or whoever's running the meeting or whatever. That's what I'm trying to draw the distinction between.
Rich, I have a question. Does, you know, there are people that are just intuitive as well,
Yep.
where they don't do either of those other two things, but intuitively they know what to do.
Yeah.
Maybe it's like you said, it just comes out of your brain like it's your maiden name or whatever example, but they know that's the direction to go. So that's another, I don't know how you classify that.
Well, yeah.
No,
And if you see, this is a part of the brain where you're driven by your gut feeling.
Yeah, exactly.
You can talk about it, but not describe it.
So
Right.
you cannot explain, I'm sorry, Preston. I think it's right. That is intuitive because you can do it, but you cannot explain how you did it.
Exactly. Yeah.
And there are people who is intuitive, which is called natural.
Mhm.
It was a problem of, for instance, Dr. Eli Goldratt, the founder and creator of theory of constraints. He was a natural critical thinker. That's why he talked about TOC. His problem was how to teach the people to think. And sometimes you cannot assume people have that critical thinking in bed. That's why I said, even though you need a mindset and people have a mindset, you cannot assume that people have the right mindset all the time. And if you don't assume that it's better, you make sure the people have it or provide it. That's what I'm saying, because this is like, you know, like when you try to do a painting, you need to use a primer first. Because if you don't use a primer first, the paint doesn't work and doesn't last. But the primer is not included in the painting. You have to make sure to put it there, or like the bakers said, they want to bake a cake, but they need a baking powder. Because if they don't use a baking powder, the bake is not going to be. Regardless of how much butter, how much flour, they need that catalyst. And that's what I'm saying by the clear thinking of people, that most of us have it, but some of them not. So that's why when you are implementing this, you have to make sure, especially in decision making, we have the right mindset to make the decision as a group. If not, everybody's going to answer something from their own point of view. That's why you have a huge discussion with no conclusion.
There are three things I'd like to say on that. So I'm talking about knowledge here, which I wrote in the chat. So, and I will use that cake analogy, Eduardo. You can be told how to bake a cake and you look it up and you go and learn and everything. But my experience very recently, also, if you don't know the order of how to put the ingredients in, will very much determine the outcome. So, yeah, and that is a fact. My mother's cake for over 60 years.
I love that. I love that example. I'm sorry, I cited because you was right on the nail. Why? Because when you make a decision, you need not only quality ingredients, but also the process to mix up the ingredients to get a quality cake. Regardless of how good ingredients are, if your process to process those ingredients, meaning you're saying if you don't know how to put or mix up the ingredients, the cake is not going to work, regardless of the baking powder. Yes, there is a sequential order. That's what I'm saying. In the area of decision making, you need quality input, meaning quality knowledge, quality data, quality information, and quality facts. But also you need a process to process that information right to reach the right conclusion. If there is any problem, either a bad quality process of the data or bad information, either a lot of assumptions, there is no factual data, you are just assuming something, you will have a bad decision regardless of how good your process is. So what is the key? You have to make the right question to really select from data, from differentiate data from knowledge or data from information. That is the right question you have to make. But also you have to process the data to reach the right conclusion.
And I guess really then backtracking, you know, it's about the knowledge and the intelligence. You can have the knowledge, but how do you apply the intelligence? Which is, what's the phrase? A tomato is a fruit, but it's the knowledge whether you put it in the fruit salad or something. Anyway, but the other thing certainly that helps determines, you know, backtracking is certainly in my business for adoption of digital transformation and change is actually, and Manoj alluded to it earlier in the conversation, is getting the user, the patients, actually their input. What do they want? So you can have the business, you can actually have, you know, what the risk and the financial aspect, but if it's not actually right for the end users as well, this can actually impede, as we know, resistance and adoption. So therefore, they can also be an important factor in the decision-making part of it as well. So I guess, sorry, and I'm rambling on a little bit here. To me, when we have a list of actually requirements, then it's actually looking at those and analysing those to decide what and where and the quick wins and all of that as part of the decision making.
I'm thinking out loud of y'all. You're kind of getting my brain going back to different scenarios that I've lived. And one of the things that made me think is when you're putting together a group to make, so a group decision, not an individual decision, is to try to make sure you've got a nice mixture of thinkers, so that you've got the intuitive thinker, you've got the knowledge thinker, blah blah blah. Because if you don't have that, you're gonna miss some things, right? And then the other thing that seems to me to have worked the best is there really needs to be, if it's a group decision, somebody really knows how to facilitate. In other words, they pull themselves away from the meeting, they pull themselves away from their opinions, and they stand outside and they facilitate to make sure that they pull in as much information as they can. To me, that's been a real major success factor in decision making in my experience.
Excuse me, President. And how does he facilitate? What does he do to facilitate?
Well, he facilitates by asking questions, by making sure the group is totally involved, by pulling out information, by keeping the group on track. You know, it's a role. It's something that I haven't seen on this list, but it's a role that if it's well done by the right person, it can extremely make better, faster, more thorough decisions, because they get away from being personally involved in what's going on in the actual data, etc. They force themselves to try to make sure all the alternatives are considered, that people don't get squashed or pushed to, you know, it's facilitation is facilitation. And I just think
I know. But again, you're talking about the core of the facilitation is to make the right questions, to keep everybody focused, making the right question, to pull out the right information, to reach the right conclusion. And you can either do it with a group or within yourself. Mm-hmm. That is the difference, to do it intuitively and do it consciously, because you make yourself the right questions to make a decision. And this is when you are conscious about that. Mm-hmm. And talking about the point that Hazel did, I'm sorry, I hope I pronounced your name right, about the intelligence and the thinking, because Albert Einstein used to say that. Albert Einstein used to say that we cannot solve the problems using the same way of thinking we used to create them. And he said, I didn't say using your intelligence. He said that, say way of thinking, and try to separate that, because he said, you might probably think that I am very intelligent because I'm Albert Einstein, but I also make wrong decisions because I didn't think clearly. And he referred painfully, because he said, if I knew what was going to be done by my formula about EC, the formula, you know, what was going to be made by the man, probably I wouldn't have created it, because I wasn't expecting that formula to be used to harm people. Talking about the bomb, the atomic bomb. I said that was a decision. That was not because of my intelligence. And he tried to separate that. So coming back, just to phrase up, he said, decision depends on the way of thinking, because the intelligence is constant. The IQ, what it varies is your way of thinking. And that is the way for you to make the right decision, regardless of how intelligent you are. And he made himself as an example. Look at me, he said. Everybody think I'm intelligent. I've also made wrong decisions.
And it's important, because to me, success is how you address failure. But that's something else. Ross, I just see here that you've written asking questions of others to confirm initial thoughts. I would actually put it that, so I ask people for their thoughts on certain things, which is an open-ended. And my experience, certainly working with Federal at the moment around cybersecurity, is that people naturally contribute their points of views, which is experience, knowledge, art of the possible. And it really then helps provoke other elements of the mindset.
Absolutely.
So, and that to me can actually end up being the golden nuggets for, you know, the priority list for decisions to be made.
I mean, this is classic OD foundational stuff. Later, Edgar Schein with process consultancy, Beyond's groups. You bring all those together and ask the right question, you create magic. And you won't get that in any framework or tool that you would buy off the internet.
Right.
And this is what I get so frustrated with change management today. Yeah, I really do. But I don't. I'm quite capable of expressing that. I just noticed, Hazel, you asked the question, what is Robonomics? If you read my newsletter next Sunday, it'll answer part of the question and it'll give you a reference to the rest.
Hey, Reg, I had a thought too about when you're making individual decisions.
Yeah.
That one of the things that will help make the best decisions if you're an individual decision maker is if you really know and understand yourself. And I'll give you my own example. You know, I'm highly competitive. I'm highly confrontive. I mean, all my behavioral things are way over on this side. And if I let myself just go and be my natural self, I mean, I'm a disaster, right? So I think that's a really important thing in individual decision making is, you know, come on, you don't need a Cadillac, you need a Chevrolet. Come on, you don't, you know, so that's to me is a really critical thing for an individual thinker to have maybe somebody fact check or just make yourself aware when you're doing those things about who you are. That's about the whole entrepreneurial thing, because they have all these great ideas, but they don't know how to run a freaking business. They don't have basic one-on-one make money.
And that's why they sell it.
But they're good at being passionate about what their focus for the business is.
Yes.
And
Absolutely.
that's what investors like in. And then they can bring in all the other people to actually, what I call, spin those plates necessary to drive the business. But that's a different conversation. But to your point, Preston, and obviously you're really making me chuckle about, you know, you've been a loose cannon, which is, to me, is fantastic. I'm actually writing here. To me, humor is invaluable as well, because to your point about knowing who you are, you have to be able to, you know, either use it within the arena of who you're asking decisions to be made from, or with yourself as well. And as long as it's timed, you know, and appropriate and everything. Sure. But yeah, I love, that was really interesting to hear.
I'm going to take that one step farther, because I think I was successful in a lot of ways because I also really knew the same thing about my audience. So if I'm in a managerial group, I really know a whole hell of a lot about how they think and how they operate and what turns them on and what, because if you don't know that, and if you haven't developed that, you know, you're taking a shot in the dark kind of thing. And, you know, you're going to get blindsided because you don't understand things about them. So a lot of my success background has been with team development, to understand what is that team I've got in there and who are they and what they look like. And, you know, are they the same way I am? Gosh, I need somebody else that's different than me. You know, that's another whole other thing.
Absolutely.
Just sorry, very briefly. So that is one thing that I always do due diligence around, with the exception of everybody today, due diligence around my audience, whether I'm going to a dinner with a company or something, but just to get that, because even from technology, going back to gut instinct and everything, I can get that from certain people, and it is hugely helpful and informative, and helps set a playing field and actually opens up conversation as well, you know, to help get the knowledge or information or that decision around as well.
I mean, linking into that, Hazel, and what Pete said is that for me, I was taught at the age of 10 by a very wise university professor, Japanese guy. He used to stay with us in my parents' pub. And as a 10-year-old, I was doing what 10-year-olds do, telling everybody that I knew everything. And he just looked at me in his very quiet Japanese way, and he said, "Young man, I humbly suggest that you act stupid intelligently." And it was probably the best advice I'd ever had given to me. And of course, what he meant there is like you do with children, and they come home and they tell you what they've explored and done today. And you don't say, "Oh, that's easy, wait till you get to X or Y." You say, "Wow, that's fantastic." And then what do? You unwrap it with them, asking questions. And it's the same for me when you're coming to decision making and helping people make decisions. You ask those questions irrespective of what your thoughts are by acting stupid intelligently. And if we can only do that in organizations, wow, you can move forward, I suggest.
Okay, I added a couple of comments here on the facilitator. One thought is, are all decisions of the same magnitude requiring this? And even if they were, are there sufficient numbers of objective facilitators in most organizations to fill this role? Another thought came to mind is, if you use the consent decision process, is an objective facilitator needed, assuming you've got the right people in the room?
Ross, just a quick comment before people have discussed it. There's a cultural national thing here.
Okay.
In my world here, there is no such thing as a facilitator. There's a moderator, and to be a moderator, you have to be an expert in the subject. Whereas in the UK, US type is a facilitator, you can be ignorant of the subject and create magic with those who you're with. So there's a real cultural, national difference between the word facilitator here.
I'll say this rather than rush it. It's my little cynicism for today, but the answer to that question, Ross, many tier 1 consulting companies sell the need for this very lucratively, unfortunately.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. And it comes back to the whole issue of change. If the world is changing as much as things are being pushed in that direction, there's not enough of experts to go around. We can't rely on experts to be able to do the challenges ahead of us. And if we start to put processes in place that require such expertise, we're going to be heading to failure.
Well, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just very briefly, Edward, I really am sorry. I'm so passionate about this. That is exactly what is happening within the world of cybersecurity right now. There are not the experts to be able to solve the problems in terms of emergency and preparedness for the next tsunami, or shall I say the one that's currently going on geopolitically. It is a huge problem.
What I was saying regarding the comment just now was made. I think the third question really answers that. When you talk about would the consent decision process require a facilitator or moderator or whatever it is? Well, if you talk about the consent decision making, the same mental primer, using the example of the paint, if everybody has the same mental primer, you don't need any facilitator because everybody shares the way of thinking, and the people is sharing the same mental primer, everything works fine. Because what is doing the facilitator or the moderator is what Preston Barry was just describing very fitly. Is a guy who is pulling up information, keep everyone focused, asking the right question. And I was just mentioned to him, well, that can be done by the guy, but also can be done by yourself. And as long as you are fit, what I'm saying, as long as people know how to prepare, using about the term of Hazel, the preparedness, as long as people is prepared and equipped to do it, it's fine. But if people is not prepared about how fit they are to make decisions, you need to make sure in advance rather than having trouble during the implementation. And if it's not equipped, meaning they don't have the mental primer, trying to use the example of the painting, also you will have a difficulty. But how about you start doing that? Meaning to anticipate and to make sure that people have the same mental primer. Well, that's why we do it. Sorry?
Eduardo, I'm so pleased you said all of that. For me, though, the challenge is what is the mental primer, and what's being sold in the marketplace are facilitation courses and tools and all these sorts of things. And I always say, well, first of all, who's been taught to listen? As kids, we're told to listen, but it wasn't until I was nearly 30 someone taught me how to. Then we judge each other by what we represent rather than who we are. So we shouldn't judge people. We should accept them for who they are and not what they are. And it's these basic, and there's a whole list of these things. But if people were taught that instead of, and I used to teach and write MBA stuff, instead of Porter and all the other stuff, if they learned those basic human things, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because they would actually be able to sit down and discuss something and come to an agreement quite quickly.
Well,
That's the primer.
Yeah, well, what I'm saying, right, is just totally right. But what the problem is that the kids, you just now mentioned the kids, are the first ones who start using to make questions, but the adults are the ones who start to suppress that skill, because what is the first question the kid asks when he's a minor? Why?
Yeah.
You gotta do this, why? And then, because I'm your father, because I'm your mother. That is not the reason. And the guy is asking why. And when the guys start to be suppressed or to be limited or diminished to start asking questions, the minor is grown just by listening to people and getting the information without even ask why. And that is a problem, because when you grow up, you start being judgmental, as you were saying, that start to getting what I call the mental glaucoma. And the mental glaucoma, you get it from being exposed to several experiences in cultures. And when you go to a place, you have already a mental glaucoma. And I say, when people suffer from mental glaucoma, which is very dirty mindset, because of the judgmental and experiences in that, your perception and vision of things are clouded, of course, because you put your lenses, looking at Adriana's nice face, you have in your lenses some kind of dirty. I have mine. I always have my lenses very, very dirt. Your perception and vision is clouded, is distorted, and biased, because you tend to I'm sorry, Adriana, I'm just trying to get your example. I didn't mean it.
Yeah.
What I'm saying is that your vision is clouded because it's already interfered by all your last experiences. It's distorted because you don't look at that clearly, and it's biased because you tend to answer based on your former experience.
Absolutely.
Compare that to the kids when they are minor, because I had a chance to teach kids the mental primer, and it was very nice to see how quicker the kids are to solve a problem, to make decisions compared to an adult. Sometimes the adults group tend to get into a discussion, scuffle, and fight each other and stuff like that, giving their own way of thinking. And the kid was just very smoothly making the right question, look for the answers and process that and say, this is my result. And the guys, the adult was fighting each other, still without focus. That is my point about the mental primer. And you very fitly, Greg, emphasize that right now. Thank you.
This mental primer is so important, but society is losing it. We kill curiosity in the same way with kids. We overprotect them, and we go, and curiosity is part of the decision-making process.
Yes.
Let's jump to the second part, then the actual selection process. Talking about manager-centric or group or process. I mean, in school, you talk an awful lot about a process for weighted rankings, but I can't remember actually using one. I mean, you get into criteria, but oftentimes the weighting is more of a a pass-fail type of weighting, certain criteria, than it is a weighting criteria. The issue of getting all the information on the table to some extent also ties in with the consent process. And that if anyone disagrees, they have to put on the table for discussion their rationale of why they disagree. Thoughts here?
So I've recently gone through an exercise with the group where requirements were gathered from the industry to an audience who had very little, if no experience within the topic. And yet there were an advisory board that had to make decisions. So the approach that I took, it was a large group as well, and it was via Zoom. And there were other permutations in terms of the demographics. I was thinking, how do I do this? So I used the Moscow approach and actually talked through some of those and then put it back to everybody that I was happy to make time to talk through individual items from the requirements list to explain it. And the feedback was that they found that very, very helpful. So must have, could have, should have, would have. So that was just really one approach that I had to be really creative in a short space of time via Zoom, not in person. And as I say, there were lots of constraints with the board in question.
Yeah, I had this actually, not yesterday, the day before yesterday, with a group of really intelligent, process-driven people, and technical and manager role in the same hat. So the technical is they love it because they're all engineers of one form or another. So the managed stuff gets pushed to one side all the time. And I, like you, thought, well, how the hell do I help them understand what they're doing? So I just used the I must do, I need to do, I like to do, and I really enjoy doing. And I said, now let's look at what you do under those categories and try and make sense. And of course, it nearly all fell down in the fourth one. And so I said, maybe that's one of the things we need to look at. So yeah, we need to do this sort of thing to help them see things from different directions. And for me, this is, I don't think it actually fits in any of these. It's more of, in my role there as more as the coach and more of a coach in that particular workshop. I'm neither a leader, although some people could see me as one, although I do everything to stop that. It's not a group-based thing, and it's not process-oriented. It's not one of these fish bones and everything. It's a human thing again, which is falling outside of all these technical management speak that I've struggled with. You know?
How would you describe that process or category?
I think it's more about mindsets, which is an emotional thing. It comes back to what Eduardo was saying, which I always say is, if you start to think differently, you behave differently. And so if they're thinking about what they enjoy, they will behave accordingly. Or if they're thinking about what they must do because the boss is putting pressure, they behave differently. So it's around individual mindsets based on emotional triggers, I think.
So you don't focus on the decision, you focus on having them think different.
That's part of how they make the decision, is how they prioritize it, is usually an emotional response to one of those triggers, and maybe others, but they're the ones I use there. So that's their priority process. The content doesn't really matter. And we have a saying in Austria for Austrians, and it's throughout society and politics, that if I ignore it, it will go away. Of course, it doesn't. It never does go away. It often gets worse. And you've only got to read the latest on the what's happening politically, etc. But it is a cultural trait. So we have to wrestle with that in the first place. That's the first mindset issue. And then we have the others.
Ross, I want to just throw something in a second. When you talk about the manager leader-centric, it brought back a decision tree concept of Jones and Beerley, I think it is. But they basically talk about command decisions, consultation decisions, consensus decisions, and convenience decisions. And does that make sense to you guys, what I'm talking about? Have you all seen that before?
Okay, what's a convenience decision?
Well, convenience is something like, okay, we're going to have a meeting tomorrow. Somebody decide what we're going to eat.
Oh,
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, no consequence, whatever. Boom. Let's don't spend 30 minutes on trying to figure out if we're getting sandwiches or pasta, right?
Yeah.
And then tied into that is also, and I got this out of participatory management, is what are you trying to do with your team at the same time? And what's important is, so what are some of the overriding considerations of time, trust, teamwork, importance, and acceptance? And you'll use those 4 pieces to matched up with those considerations. So again, it was time. Is there a time crunch? The building's on fire, right? Do people already trust you so you can make a command decision and it's not a big deal? Are you trying to build teamwork? So maybe the consensus and the collaboration are more important. And then how important is it? So more people because of the overall importance of the decision. And then finally, what kind of level of acceptance are you trying to get? So the more collaboration and consensus that you get, the more acceptance you're going to get of the decision from the group. That's really old school. This piece of paper is from probably 1980, but I go back to it all the time because it's like, okay, particularly in team building and stuff like that, I rely on that a lot, kind of thing. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it links also to the old Tannenbaum and Schmidt authority continuum, tell, sell, and so on. There's a link between the 2 mindsets and the environments. But what's missing now we're talking about this for me, and I'm not sure where it would sit, Ross, and that is one of the criteria for prioritizing and so forth is the system. What's the impact on the system? It's not there. Maybe it's there somewhere. Because this is often left out of decision making because they're focusing on their own silo or function and they're not looking at it more from the system.
okay. Does that get into who needs to be involved here?
I think that's secondary. I think the first thing is to understand that it will impact on others. And then the next question is, who are those others? And this again is why a good network organization and also the informal organizations work so well. Because it's all on a system basis.
When you say system, Reg, just
Mm.
expand a little bit more, please.
Well,
that has different connotations.
okay. I look at systems as, if I say ecosystem, would that make sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay. If we take marketing as its own ecosystem, but it's not the only ecosystem that it's part of, yeah? So it's a community, because very often they think we're the ecosystem and we do everything that's within our world. But actually they're one community within a bigger ecosystem. And manufacturing is another community within the ecosystem. And then we bring all these communities. Each one of those communities has its own system in how they work and interact with each other. And through processes, typically, each one of those communities is linked to the other community to create another system for the end product of typically the out-of-date value chain. And so then there is another system, another ecosystem outside the organization's one, where typically it's a customer. So that's another community with its own system. And if you also consider that community as part of the ecosystem when you're making decisions, you're now making decisions impacting, and you can do the same with supply chain management and so forth. We're starting to look at different systems and their need for connectivity, and the decision in one ripples through all of those. And that's one of the problems with organizations at the moment. If you set an objective very often at board level, and you're not meeting it because you don't have enough resources, and you ask somebody else to give resources, they won't do it. And the board doesn't order it, even though they say they're going to go bust, they still don't do it. And there's loads and loads of research to show that each of these communities is not able to share within the ecosystem of the whole system. And decision making is a key part for that. Does that confuse you or help you?
No, just confirm. I'm sorry, Ray. You just really confirm the need for the mental primer. Because if it's this ecosystem, everybody shares the same mental primer, it's very easy for them to rearrange or communicate any change of priorities because they have a common approach. They have a common mental platform. And the other thing is, the other thing is with what you are emphasizing right here is the common vulnerability that all organizations have around implementing business transformation strategies. Because as you know, commonly you see that the area of mental primer, mindset, or however you want to call it, is the need that people that is implementing wrongly Scrum, Safe, Agile, digital transformation, Lean, Six Sigma, they all ask for, oh, if this is the problem here is a sort of mindset, because the cultural mindset is not there. You see, even the people from Theory of Constraints talk about that. Why is it that we are not able to make sure that everybody's using it? Because this is a matter of mindset. And if any, as well as the change management and preparedness, talking about Hazel's point, if any, I call it without offense, a smart consulting company that is interested to talk about decision-making or change management, focus on providing a solution to address that common need. It will make billions because everybody needs that, even in the area of coaching. Can you imagine if we provide, I'm talking about us, a business solution just to address that common need in the community of Safe, Agile, Scrum, the community of Lean and Six Sigma, the community of change management, the community of digital transformation, because it's amazing to see that the companies keep investing $1.7 trillion implementing digital transformation strategies, and most of them are wrongly deployed and unsustainable. And you see, looks that the people tend to become used to the failure probability. Oh, let's try to keep investing even though we are going to fail, because most of them are wrongly deployed and unsustainable. So coming back to your point, tremendous opportunity for us.
For you, what you're taking me back to is what I said earlier about Beyond and the work of the Tavistock. Organizations are all about the impact of an individual on a group, the impact of a group on the organization. And all three are parts of the same system, the same ecosystem. And just the one individual will affect everything in that ecosystem in one way or another. And here we are, excuse me, getting all this wonderful and analytic tools to tell us why people aren't engaged into our organization. We don't need any of that. We need to just go back and read the original work, these great masters. It's there. Yeah, it's there. And if we understand that, we don't need these tools about engagement. And if we get rid of SHRM, strategic human resource management, because people don't react to the same reasons as shareholders, we know that from centuries ago, and yet we keep doing it. Well, others do. I won't. I refuse to do it.
Yes. Yes.
There's just one point I just want to add, that when we're talking, what's come to my mind, about the mindset and the mental glaucoma, I think a key problem as well is having a standard understanding, because when people hear change, and to your point, Eduardo, the community starts championing their own knowledge on what they know, and it's really then, whereas to help make a decision, where is actually the level playing field of understanding? And I can say that with confidence in the world of interoperability, which I'm a big fan of being the elephant in the room and asking the question that what does interoperability mean for everybody on the call today? Or what does change mean? I was on a call the other day in change management, and I heard somebody go, "Oh, that's a bad word." Why? Because they were focused on the technology, ITIL change management, rather than actually the organizational change, which the other person on the other end of the line was on. And this can cause problems in actually, in my opinion, expediting selection and decision making as well.
That's correct. That's correct.
I won't use the word change management when I'm working with organizations. Maybe I'm old-fashioned and old, but I still look at it as personal and organizational development. And I work with them and say, right, let's see how we can help you do what you enjoy doing. And if we fail, you have a choice. You can either stay or go somewhere else where you'll find it. But let's work together and let's make that happen. And I've probably had one person walk out in 40 odd years of doing it, because this is what people want to do. Even those who come to work just because they need to get some money to get food on the table, and they only want to work fixed hours and go home, they don't want to get too involved. But that's what they want. They want to enjoy what they're doing. And so I won't use change management, because I don't believe in change management.
Well, the thing, Greg, is that you see that from commercial purposes, it's very interesting that despite the proliferation of change management consultants and methodologies and approaches, and the McDonaldization of change management that has created thousands of online change management practitioners offering just some placebos and palliatives that don't work, the companies keep engaging in those sorts of products. And I said, what if, and they tend to use this kind of glamorous title, oh, people resist change. And I just happened to learn from one of Toyota executives who said, why does people resist change? And they say, well, when people face change, they don't perform as expected, either because they don't understand why change is needed, or because they don't know how to perform as expected with change, or simply they can't. There is some task interference that stops them from that. If you address those answers in advance, people will embrace change and make sure it's implemented in a sustainable manner. It's quite common sense. It's what Hitoshi Yamada, the protege of Taiichi Ono, the one who worked with TPS in Toyota. Hitoshi Yamada was the protege of Taiichi Ono, and he used to say, on those years, preparing the soil is necessary before seeding change or seeding lean. Otherwise, no change will ever happen. Yeah. He was saying that on those years, and after 40 years, people still don't realize how important for the companies to prepare the soil before engage in this issue, but in a simple manner. I always make an example about the runners, the marathon, because you seem to be a very exercise guy. Marathons, before they enter a marathon, they do a fitness test because they want to know how fit they are before enter the marathon, because they don't want to collapse during the race. If any company who is going to engage in digital transformation or change or whatever this initiative you're trying to implement, do a readiness assessment just to assess how fit the company, as far as culture, processes, and systems, and people as well, is fit. And any capability gaps you identify in advance, you address them, you will anticipate any deployment failure. this is the number of initiatives will be very, very much reduced. The number of initiatives that are wrongly deployed and unsustainable. But this is quite simple. And I always keep saying, this guy said that about 40 years ago. Edward Deming used to say that when he was talking to the managers and say, hey guys, everybody here expects miracles. And you think that just all you need to do is to copy from Japan, but you don't know what to copy.
I mean, for me, Deming was a contradiction. He was a bully and yet preached kindness.
Well, my friend is whether he was a bully or probably we thought in the Western world that we have a very thick skin, but the Japanese didn't complain.
Yeah, I know, he was really tough.
And he dealt with them, and he dealt with them for years. And I never seen any Japanese complaining about how blunt Edward Deming was.
Yeah. I think really this, for me, is also one of the difficulties in decision making is, particularly if you want to make some changes in an organization, is it seems to always be focused on episodic change. These big changes every now and again, because managers haven't made the micro changes that were necessary and developed the organization as they go along. It's always put off because there's another priority. And this is the other side of the decision making, is about timeliness. And they only wait for the pressure, and then it becomes a big episodic change, and they wonder where it goes wrong because they're not even connected, most of these changes.
Okay, if we were to shift then into speed versus quality, we've talked in and around it, and a lot of the alternate, for example, sociocracy, holacracy, will try to speed up the decision-making process, but at the same time, they added additional or different types of bureaucracy to the documentation as well as the involvement. So I'm not sold on it, but at the same time, there's increasing pressure. I'm not sure agility's got all the answers either.
Maybe I can make a comment here to start the talk.
Go ahead.
I'm really struggling with this speed versus quality stuff, because I think what's happening increasingly at the moment through technology enables us to do some things much quicker than we have in the past.
Sure.
And the result of that is we're compressing time on the human side. We're trying to make decisions and match the speed of technology because it makes expectations from others that things can be done quicker. And I think we're in a big, big risk area here in this compression of time.
That's right.
Just my view.
But the thing is, if technology were really helping, why most of these technology platforms are wrongly deployed and unsustainable?
Okay, repeat that again.
Yes, if technology was really helpful, why the technology platforms, you name it, are still wrongly deployed and unsustainable? There is something we are missing, or there is something we are doing wrong. But at the end, technology is not helping.
If we look at manufacturing, it's made significant difference. If you look at the day-to-day operations of management, we're still swapping a typewriter for a computer. We've got, instead of a Roneo, we've now got a scan, well, not even a scanner now, and all this sort of stuff. We're using PowerPoint instead of a blackboard in schools. We're just replacing the machinery, but not making use of that machinery in a different way in management terms. In engineering and manufacturing, I think they've made fantastic strides, and it's a different world. Quality is now not even an issue in many areas because the systems actually make sure of it. But on the management side and the decision making and stuff, I think we are just replacing the existing with something that looks different and works differently, and not getting joined up thinking of how can we use it differently. Email, if you remember when emails came, we had to persuade our bosses to use emails now because we thought they were fantastic. Now they're one of the biggest problems that we've got in organizations.
That is
I'm
correct.
being a manufacturing guy, Reg. I agree with you. I remember when we implemented SAP, all of a sudden I had access to everything I could possibly want to know about the company I could get. Okay. And then, you know, everybody, all the other facilities data, my data, blah, blah, blah. So it was a huge improvement. The thing that made us really successful was we shared that information within our company very openly, all the way down to the lowest level. There it is, it's there. And it's like, well, what about your competition coming and looking at it? Da, 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 da. It's like, you know what? If we're not faster than they are, then we shouldn't survive. That's the way it is. Sorry, let's kick ass and take names. So we developed a constant change culture of always being ahead of everybody else. And we drove it all the way down, and we pushed decision-making down as far as we could. Obviously, we put a risk factor in there. You know, you don't sink the ship, blah, blah, blah. But it was really interesting to see how we got this continuous change process going, because we expected different things all the time. And part of our reporting process was, well, what did you do different this month that we didn't do last month? And what are you going to do different next month? And oh, by the way, what did you go back and take away because it didn't work? And it became a real interesting driver in the corporation. We kind of had I don't know what you want to call it, but it was just a process of reporting change, and everybody saw it. So all the manufacturing teams shared all their monthly change reports across the whole company, and you'd get the call and go, how the hell did you guys do that? Blah, blah. So anyway, it was, I don't know, I'm just kind of talking about how technology made us go faster, better, quicker, and also better informed our entire staff, because we were willing to share and we were willing to push decisions and options farther down in the org. So
Yeah, what I was trying to point out was not the intention. I always said that technology has a good intentions, but you know that the road to hell are paved with good intentions. And in this particular case, we are using technology, but we are not using wisely. We are just changing, like somebody who wants to lose weight, taking pills, or do some gastric, something like that in the stomach. But he wants to keep eating all the fatty things, no change in behaviors, no change in anything. That's why that doesn't work. They become fatter again. In this particular case, if we just focus on improving the toys, emails and stuff like that, flashy presentations, but the way of thinking remain very old way of thinking. So what is the point then? Because the machines and technology don't make decisions.
I agree. I mean, Pete, I'm really intrigued in what you say, because working with not just mainly auto, but oil and gas and a few others, what I've found is they spend a fortune on the best technology for production, even systems design and all this stuff. So we take, for example, if you've got an internal combustion engine, you shrink the time of development by, I don't know, almost 2/3 with the technology. And the outcome is far superior to what it was when you took even longer. And then when you look at the way it's all lined up with all this wonderful technology and it's sitting there doing nothing, and you think, well, what's wrong? Then you look at the management side and they're still stuck in the 1970s. They're arguing over functional things rather than making important decisions for manufacturing. Was that your experience? That you seem to say that your communication process improved? If so, how the hell did you do it?
Yes.
Well, I have a personal example where I was like a senior vice president of human resources, and I decided I was going to go be a general manager of a facility, and go down like 3 levels, okay? Because I wanted to implement some of the things myself. So when we got there, I realized that when you look at that team, we started saying, well, what do they need to know? And, you know, how come they're not on the same system as us, blah, blah, blah. And, you know, the first thing we did was start to develop trust.
Mhm.
And once we started developing trust and sharing and knowledge and stuff like that, you know, we started to gain their interest in what we were doing. And we did a lot of training about, this is how we make money. This is what we do in our factory. This is how we survive. You know, we don't go out and do technical shit, and we don't go sell crap, and we don't go buy crap. What we do is stuff comes in the door, we process it, and we ship it out. It's got to be in spec, on time, low cost. That's all we do, period. I don't hear about all this other crap. So once we got that going and providing all that information, we started sharing it with other facilities. They're like, well, this is really interesting. You know, why are you doing this? And it's like, well, this is what our employees see every day. They get this report every single morning. This is what's going on. This is what's happening, blah, blah, blah. And our numbers in that facility took off. And we had about a 25% improvement across the board. And a lot of it was how we communicated every single day in daily reports, in monthly reporting processes. What did you change? Da, 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 da. And then we shared among our facilities what was working there with all our employees. Hey, look, they're making 33,083, like an hour and 14 minutes faster than us. Why the hell is that happening? And we would, you know, that communication process, I don't know how best to explain it, but because we were open and honest and upfront, we developed trust, we shared information. I went through the same battle. We were the first factory to put our hourly employees on the internet and also on email. And you would have thought I was caving in the world because, no, you can't let the hourly employees have the internet. I mean, sure we can. They can go out and research that crap as good as I can. It was a real shocker because I came from like left field with all this stuff, and all of a sudden our numbers are really improving. They want to know, well, where's the factual stuff that made this happen? I can't put my finger on any of it because it all happened to us personally. There's 1,000 little things that everybody did. I don't know, I'm kind of talking off the top of my head, but
No,
that was the result of it.
I find it helpful because that's exactly what I'm doing at the moment with an organization. And it links back to what Hazel said earlier directly, and that's about communication. If you're going to make decisions, you've got to have the communication on time and the right type of communication. And as Eduardo says, you've got to be able to trust that. And building trust in the organization is removing the fear. We know from the Fiat example from the late boss of Fiat, the first thing he did when he took over a basket case company was remove fear as much as he could. And it grew exponentially afterwards. So it reinforces what I'm doing. And so I'm grateful for that. And I hope I have the same outcome that you had.
I tell you what, it's the best job I ever had in my life, and the most fun job I ever had, and the most rewarding job I ever had was turning around a facility that was awful to being a top 5 out of 27 facilities. Every single month we kicked ass. Yeah. And we got no capital and no new equipment or anything for the first 4 or 5 years until all of a sudden they're like, maybe we need to spend some money down there since they're kicking everybody else's butt. But we did it all with our people. And the interesting thing was they were exactly the same people that were there when we were awful. Exactly.
And that comes out of your voice, the passion comes out. And for me, that comes back to Ross's question, speed versus quality. I think you can bring them both together if you've got the passion and you're working together in a trusting organization. I don't think it's a trade-off. I think you can have both. Yeah.
Well, it's really nice when any person feels like they can challenge a decision or challenge a question or come up with an idea and they're not going to be ostracized or whatever. Yeah. You know, one of our goals was to treat everybody with dignity and respect, regardless of what their role was or title was, et cetera. And if you looked at my business card as a general manager, it didn't even have my title on it. And I wore a blue work shirt and blue pants to work every day, just like every other employee in the factory. And I didn't have a special parking space, you know, blah, blah, blah. We were all there for the same reason. Yeah, you know, absolutely. And that's absolutely. that was the winning factor for us. So
yeah. And again, this gets into national issues because where we are, I mean, I'm originally from England. The word manager was a very flexible term. Mm-hmm. Here, it's legally defined. And those are the constraints you have. Yeah, the
Yeah.
blue collar, white collar is a very legal situation here.
Yeah.
It's getting better, but my goodness, it's a hard task.
I spent a lot of time in Europe at our factories, so I have the understanding of that. Yeah, it was very disheartening.
I call it challenging.
It is.
Ross, is there anything else that's important for you in this speed versus quality when you raised it?
No, I think I think I'm getting what I intended. But again, I was just trying the shotgun to see what ideas others might have.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Any other comments or questions? Or are we getting close to a wrap up for today?
Hey, Ross, one of the things I would say is on the speed of making decisions is
Yep.
how much risk tolerance are you willing to have?
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're going to make quick decisions, you're going to make mistakes. And if you're risk tolerant, that's fine, and you learn from it, but you move on, and you just don't take huge, it's the balancing act, so to speak.
Yeah, risk assessment in the decision is important because it's precisely what is going to help you to protect the implementation of the decision, because brilliant decisions made are wrongly implemented.
And I would add to that, risk tolerance is how easy is it to fix it or change back if it doesn't work. I mean, that's one of those, if you're willing to accept risk, you're willing to go, well, that didn't work, let's try something else, so.
And also this is contextual, this risk tolerance, because if you're working with chemicals, then risk is a totally different definition.
Sure.
Sure. And so I think this is really, really contextual.
Right.
Yeah, but my point is when you assess the risk, it's going to tell you to make the right decision, meaning the one that will give you more benefit, less cost, but also less risk. Even though it's risky, that doesn't mean that you don't make the decision. You can make the decision, but the value of that is you can protect the decision, anticipating any potential problems, implementing that decision, focus on the risk. That is when Murphy's law is coming on board, no? Because if something is gonna fail, it will. And why is gonna fail? And the risk that you anticipated.
There's also, though, again, in the context of if you're in a development organization, you sometimes decide to take the risky approach in order to maybe gain more advantages or opportunities from that. And so it's not always about the least risk option, it's sometimes taking the most risk option, but you realize what the risk of doing that is. So it is still based on the risk decision.
Yeah, a good example of that is, a product that's not right in quality, and you decide, well, versus studying it for 3 months, let's try this because it's already crap anyway.
Yeah.
And you reach a better final result faster by taking a little more risk and,
In fact, in Korea, it's very common to implement a decision knowing it's the wrong decision to see what the reaction is. And this is a very, very common thing in that country.
Yeah, that's
and
interesting.
we would very seldom even consider doing that in Europe.
How do they limit the impact of those decisions knowing that it's going to fail? Do they take that into consideration?
It basically is more effectuation.
Okay.
What can we forward to those?
Okay. So
It's like cultural, right? I mean, if it's something they're doing already all the time, it's not that big a deal.
Yeah, but,
Right.
but the point is that, what was your question, Ross? Is is it going to fail?
well,
Is what you're saying about the decision?
if they're purposely setting up situations that they know will fail as part of a change process, and okay, how much risk, or how do they factor in the risk of such a failure?
Okay.
Or the impact of such a failure, knowing this will happen.
Okay, you say, well, it might happen, is what you are saying, because you are in the decision-making dimension.
Yeah, in Reg's situation in Korea, they were setting up situations that they knew were failing, that they knew would fail, to basically see the reaction.
And that's a national approach. It's not just a one company approach.
Right.
Yeah, but what I'm saying is when you decide to implement a risky decision, what I'm saying, the decision that you are saying that it will likely fail,
Yeah.
that is the benefit of the value to do a potential problem analysis, because you are going to establish a preventive mechanism and also a contingent mechanism to minimize the risk in case it happens. That the value of the decision making, assessing the risk, is preparing you to be proactive and protect the implementation of the decision. And in terms of change, is the value of assessing the readiness of the company. It's practically a risk assessment. By you doing a readiness assessment, you anticipate if something might go wrong, but also you can maximize a potential strength. As Greg was now saying, it's not a matter of something is going to fail. Probably there are some opportunities you can capitalize on. The changes also bring some opportunities. In doing the readiness assessment, you can anticipate any strengths the organization have, or any vulnerabilities. What can we do to minimize the vulnerabilities, but also what can we do to maximize the opportunity we see implementing that decision regardless of the risk?
I mean, if you look at the Canadian framework, what they're doing is they're going from ordered state into controlled chaos, which may seem strange, but that you create chaos within a controlled environment, and from there you can really learn. And it's one of the few places you can really learn. You have to create that. The other quadrants of complex and complicated, they won't give you what you want from that process. And that's experimentation, isn't it?
Yes, and the surprising thing is when you really do a sort of protection analysis or proactive analysis, you will realize that by taking preventive measures, it's not costly at all, because they are either changing a little bit the date, or establishing someone to make a phone call, or doing some arrangements about the role of someone. So it's not costly. By not doing that, when you implement a risky decision and it fails, it's because of that. Because you didn't put someone in charge to raise a flag, or you didn't do any negotiation around reschedule. That's why the bomb exploded.
Yeah.
And you have to spend a lot of money minimizing the effects when it already happened.
I mean, the important distinction for me here is you're not setting somebody up to fail. You're enabling them to try something to find out what really will happen, even if you believe it might be failure. And that, for me, is an important distinction for maintaining the credibility of the organization. I have to go in a minute. I have to say, from a personal point of view, I hope I haven't said too much, but I've really enjoyed this interaction, and I hope we have more of these, because it's really by listening to other people. And I mean, Eduardo, you've written quite a few things, and you and I have wrestled with each other in different fora.
I love it. I love it.
Let me finish. And so in my mind, I was thinking, how does this guy think? Now I've got a much better idea, and I really appreciate it.
I likewise, right? But the thing right now I was about to ask Ross, I like to go, selfishly speaking, one step further. And given the situation we are confronting, everybody, regardless of geography, about the problems implementing change, digital transformation, decision making, what, Ross, do you have in mind? Because I tell you something, again, selfishly, when you propose to have these sort of sessions about maturity, about decision-making, I want to see what this guy has in mind. Is he thinking to get a group to establish a sort of new business solution, to make a value contribution to the chaos already is out there? Or what is he thinking? Or just want to have some entertainment get together and get information? Or is he thinking to establish a real business solution and say, hey, Reg, can you come to the group and let's try to prepare a new value proposition to address the challenges the companies are facing out there, because they are just using
Before Ross answers that, let me tell you, he and I have been working together for what, nearly 6 years now on looking at organizations differently. And now we're at a stage which he will explain.
Yeah,
Well,
and-
I'm interested.
No.
Sorry, just finish my question and shut my mouth.
Yeah,
Because if
let
you are
Ross answer.
Yeah.
to do something different, I mean, I want you to invite me because I mean.
Okay, well, Ross will speak to you now.
Yeah, see, part of this is, Reg and I have been going along. We've got a pretty good understanding of where failures are occurring, what are the possibilities. But at the same time, a lot of what we're proposing is not new. It's been around and discussed for 15, 20 years. Some of the articles that were written 20 years ago are the same that are being written today. So the implementation piece is missing. So part of what we're doing in these discussions is to see how other people think themselves about these issues. Where are the challenges? What else might need to be done to move more of a, I guess, a critical mass in thinking about what can be done and should be done and what is possible. And part of it is just to see how different people think about these rather complex topics.
Oh, I'm sorry, but the thing is that although I'm very much interested about implementation and how to construct a business solution, I'm also interested from the business side because there is $1.7 trillion out there. Companies are struggling, spending a lot of money in these things, and probably Preston would agree with me because he's coming from a corporate world and face these kind of challenges there. So are we, or are you and Reg thinking to present a new value proposition to really compete
Let me try and
the
answer that. Let me try and answer that.
Yes.
Let me try and answer that. Building on what Ross said, our original idea was to say, look, all this change management stuff, it's not really achieving much. Some people are making a lot of money out of foolish customers. So let's see if we can find a different approach to change. Then while we were doing this, and then we decided we don't want to just look at it from the business management world. So we started to look at it from the biological world, right down to microcosms and all sorts. We came at it from just about every science and learned a lot. But then we had a eureka moment in organizational terms, which was for us a eureka moment. We said, hang on a minute. If we look at the history of organizations and the way they're running and so forth today, organizations are designed for control. And if you take the strategic human resource management, that's all about getting shareholder value and tying the people to that. It's not about motivation, it's about compliance. And so it's all about control. What if we looked at an organization that's designed to achieve the work? Would it be different? And I can tell you now, it looks totally different. And so we've been working on that basis to make sense of how would an organization look and operate if it was focused more on work rather than control. Well, you need controls, that's for sure. And so during that process, we also made a decision that you cannot have one model. That's not possible. So this holacracy and everything, all that did was reinvent bureaucracy, and many other problems came out of the result of it. And so we said, well, let's start from the statement of purpose of an organization and clarify what that really means. And that's the guiding light for the organization to develop how it works. And what do we need then? And we came up with a series of principles that we've identified are important for such an organization, and how those principles might be implemented through guidelines and processes and stuff. But it's not a one size fits all. And that's basically where we are. We've written a lot, and I've slung on the chat there the newsletter that we produce every Sunday, which explores some of these things in some detail. At the end of the chain, our view is that if something has no value, it's not valued. And so from the business side, we're looking at developing ways of helping people understand this different approach and support. So we'll have training. We will be looking for people in due course to work with us in that area, and so forth. So that's basically where we've come from and where we are at the moment. Is that a fair summary, Ross?
It is, and part of it is a learning process of deep dialogue, deep thinking, and asking the hard questions. And a lot of times the questions that Reg and I ask, we truly don't know the answer. We're struggling ourselves with what are the possibilities, what do others think?
But to that point, those are the questions that, for me personally, really invoke my thinking. It's so helpful and interesting to learn from others and how they think or what they don't. And when I do get the chance to contribute and everything, it's just like I feel I've been on speed now, because it's just awesome to really be part of this conversation, and the other ones online as well. Really, really helpful for me. Thank you.
I'm glad you could contribute.
Yeah, I'd throw myself in there real quick. I think what is missing out there is the tactics. It's not the models, it's the tactics that you have to use in all the different places that work in each individual place. And those tactics based upon principles. So your tactics tie into your principles. And I think that's what made a lot of our initiatives very successful. Where that didn't occur, they weren't successful. When certain people left, organizations went back to where they were because that didn't continue. And the most interesting part is we didn't spend any money. We spent no money. We did it all with our own people, and we learned and we developed. And so it's not but we always drove for shareholder value. That was our end result. And that was making money was the focus.
Yep.
So
the issue of reversion, that comes up frequently, even after having significant success. And that's a separate discussion.
it is.
And then there's another broader issue that we struggle with, is how do you reach the people who need to know?
Yeah.
About the recession, about the regression, or the
No, about the possibilities, what could be done.
oh, okay.
I mean, Pete, if I can just link into what you said just now, I think you've epitomized what Ross and I have found in all our research. Where an organization has been able to help people behave differently and garner success, it tends to be driven by one person. And that person is the energy. When that person goes, that's then the real test of sustainability. And in a bureaucracy with controls mechanisms, the way it's designed, our view has been that the risk is far higher of reversion. Whereas where you have an organization that's designed that is more about the work itself, and there are many that you can look at, the continuation of that isn't reliant on one individual anymore.
Yeah,
so that's the difference.
The successes that we achieved in technology and all that kind of stuff stayed, but the continuation of change and improvement disappeared.
Absolutely.
Because just that driving, some people went back to their old behaviors and things like that. So that's what we all do. That's our natural tendency, is we're not driven by something, we'll kind of fall back for the most part. But a lot of the technological changes and process changes, they're put in and they're done, right?
Yeah. But they're the easy things, because you just get people to comply and do them. Yeah. And the reversion on the people is because in a hierarchical organization, the likelihood of compliance as opposed to motivation is much higher. Yeah. And that makes it unsustainable. That's one of the big issues I find.
It's a great session. I'm glad I joined, guys. This has been wonderful.
Oh, come on, join us again.
Yeah.
Hey, Father, did it answer your question?
Not really, because I was just trying to know exactly what is next, Ross, and you're gonna do something, or we're just going to invite you for another gathering for 2 hours and keep conversations around this?
I'm not sure I could give you a direct answer. Most of my focus right now is getting ready for some platform changes that Mighty Networks will be rolling out and how to take advantage of that. As other topics come up, I will definitely be doing additional presentations like this, some of which may be more focused on particular areas though of problems and discussing solutions for them.
Yeah, I think for me, the challenge is we have a lot of history on frameworks and strategies and how things need to be done. But sustaining it through organizations where it's so volatile now within the environment, and whatever we speak needs to be part of BAU activities or daily activities within the organization or the functions. So previously, change management is a separate function, or you had multiple functions who are actually the custodians. But now, no, you need to have multiple excellence team who needs to actually help and build champions or catalysts within the organizations to actually take it forward and make it part of their day-to-day activity. So change shouldn't be done and dusted and left, but it's part of the whole operation of the organization. So that's the shift which needs to happen. And it's multiple organizations have multiple culture, and it's where the culture and the mindset needs to adapt to the new ways of working. And people needs to come outside what currently they are doing. And it is everyone's responsibility. And it's not a set of senior stakeholders or somebody to drive it. That's the culture which needs to happen.
Yeah,
Well,
no, I totally agree.
This is where the focus on work is important, because if people have ownership of what they do, and we've got to remember that we've got a generation coming in now who are very clear. Long time will tell whether it was the right clarity, but they're very clear in who they will work for and the reasons why they will work there. We are moving more and more to 2 levels of organization: knowledge workers and the rest. There's no middle anymore. And when we look at the rest, they tend to be minimal wage, repetitive work. And if you take nursing and hospitals, you have the same situation there. In society, we want more of the perceived lower level workers. And so we need to start, when we look at work, look at recognizing the value of that work. And then we start to change the dynamics in the organization, because we're focusing on work, not the person, not their education, but their ability to carry out the work that's important. And then we start to really change. And then in the direction of Robonomics, where we will have a society of plentifulness, and the plentifulness is leisure. So that will create a totally new industry and a way of looking at work in a through a different lens. So what I'm doing at the moment, Ross is preparing all the technology and stuff on our site. I'm writing this newsletter as I use it as a process of making sense of the sorts of things that we've been studying and researching and pulling together. And that's why I really want to encourage people to comment on that. They say, hey, Reg, this is rubbish, because that's fantastic. Or if they give a one big like and say, yeah, this is great, that worries me, because they may not have thought about it enough. But I'm using that as a vehicle, together with what we do on the platform, to test out some of the assumptions. As Eduardo said, we need to now move from if it works in the biological ecosystem world and other worlds, what stops it working in our world? And so the assumption is it should. It's like Mintzberg says, right, we shouldn't have organizations, we should have communities. The experts in communities say that can't exist in an organization but that's all based on hierarchy. And so I'm challenging those assumptions to see whether it is possible. And at the same time, I'm trying it in organizations. And so far, it's working. Okay. So that's basically where I am. And we sort of work together in how we do this.
Well, my friends, thank you very much for everything. The thing, as I said, I was trying to tell you that if you as a group of you and Ross, Greg, are working to develop an answer to what is happening out there in 2 dimensions, the companies are failing because there's a lack of organizational readiness and because it's a lack of change governance, which doesn't make it sustainable. Referring to Preston was saying, when a leader leaves, everything goes down. Why? Because the sustainability of any change, you cannot put it in hands of someone. You have to establish a change governance mechanism, like what Toyota did, regardless of who died in generations. They keep going because they didn't put anything in the hands of someone. There are 3 generations. Same thing was done by Lee Kuan Yew in Singapore to keep the sustainability of the success. Therefore, if you as a group are going to present a new business solution to help the organizations out there, you will be in the driver's seat, because right now the organizations keep bleeding, and the problem with keep bleeding is when you tend to accept the failing as a new normal. It is normal to have most of the digital transformation failing because everybody fails, like the consolation. So when that becomes part of the new normal, Houston, you got a problem. Because mediocrity is just a matter of time. But anyway,
what I'd like to ask you to do is we really believe in what we're doing. And one of the ways we can get the word out there is what we're doing. If you can let your network know about the newsletter and our site and join us in those discussions and activities, we can start to make a difference. There are so many snake oil salespeople out there in change world. It really worries me. And when I see the damage they're doing, it really, I seldom get angry, but that makes me angry.
Well, the problem is you have a lot of conversationalists about change and transformation, and you have very few specialists. And unfortunately, you have the business community between the Kardashians of change and the Lady Gagas of transformation. So when you have these two all show no value, you have a tremendous.
As a dear friend of mine who wrote the book, the Sex, Drugs and Rock and Roll, all about management, and what was the business case for Madonna to lose her virginity? I mean, it's a book well worth reading. On that note, I'll have to go. But thanks a lot. I hope you come and join us next time.
I really enjoy it.
This is
Bye-bye.
amazing. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye now. Bye-bye.
Excellent conversation. Thank you for joining us, and we'll solicit opinions for follow-up sessions like this.
Okay, thank you. Cheers.
Have a good day. Bye-bye.